All right, folks, I hope you're sitting down because we have a truly surprising development. Some Senate Republicans joined with Democrats to humiliate and defy Donald Trump and vote to overturn his tariffs, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as Fox News reports, Senate Republicans defy Vance's warning, vote to block Trump's Brazil tariffs amid shutdown. 5 GOP senators joined Democrats to advance resolution ending 50% Brazil tariffs. Let's take a look at this. I believe Midas Touch has a screen grab of this. Just in, the U.S. Senate has voted 52 to 48 to overturn Trump's 50% tariffs on Brazil. 5 Republicans joined the Democrats: Susan Collins of Maine, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Rand Paul of Kentucky, and Tom Tillis, my senator, of North Carolina. The measure, of course, is DOA in the House, as House Republicans voted earlier this year to block all votes challenging Trump's tariffs until March 2026. Because, of course, they're cowards, okay? Remember, some sort of legislation that would actually overturn Trump's tariffs requires a bipartisan effort, really in both chambers. You need it to get through the Senate and the House. Of course, Trump would probably try to veto it anyway, but it says something that we actually have not just Lisa Murkowski and not just Susan Collins, not just Rand Paul, but actually 5 together to stand up to Trump in this way. Of course, you could also make the argument that they did this knowing that their efforts were dead on arrival and that the House would effectively block any attempt to overturn the results. Let's take a look, though, at what Mitch McConnell had to say, because, again, as I've argued, Mitch McConnell, the former Republican leader in the Senate, he's still a senator, but he's no longer the leader. That is John Thune, who took his place. McConnell retired from leadership. McConnell is second only to Trump as far as I'm concerned in terms of the Republican who has helped mutate and devolve the legislature and really American politics as we know it, and set the Republican Party on this nihilistic death cult spiral. It's Donald Trump number 1, Mitch McConnell number 2, and Newt Gingrich number 3. Okay, but let's hear what McConnell had to say. I'm approaching this week's vote. No, I'm not going to do that. That's my McConnell impression. My fellow American. Okay. I'm approaching this week's votes on tariffs the same way I did earlier this year, and the same way I have my entire career. Protectionists in Washington insist that the past several months have vindicated the policy of indiscriminate trade war against both close allies and strategic adversaries. But Kentuckians are especially well equipped to sort the bluster from the truth. New trade barriers imposed this year have made it harder to sustain the supply chains that let thousands of Kentuckians build cars and appliances in the Commonwealth. Retaliatory tariffs on American products have turned agricultural income upside down for many of Kentucky's nearly 70,000 family farms. Bourbon has been caught in the crossfire from day one, and consumers are paying higher prices across the board as true costs of trade barriers fall inevitably on them. Protectionists eagerly celebrate the revenue from tariff duties, but they don't talk nearly as much about how much of that revenue they'll spend protecting American growers and producers from the avoidable harm of their policies. Tariffs make both building and buying in America more expensive. The economic harms of trade wars are not the exception to history, but the rule. And no cross-eyed reading of Reagan will reveal otherwise. This week, I will vote in favor of resolutions to end emergency tariff authorities. Yikes. Okay. Somebody noted, and I think it was a former, I'm trying to think who the former staffer was. I'll try to find the quote real quick in real time. Yeah, it's fuck Mitch McConnell forever, but that's my home state and those are my people. About time his decrepit ass stood on something that supported Kentuckians. There is a Republican out there who had this line about McConnell responding to this, saying, McConnell will still be known for when his courage failed him. Like, he's being courageous here, but he's going to be better known and reviled throughout history for when his courage failed him. And that was a Republican saying that. Of course, it was because McConnell is the one who tried to, basically, he's basically Frankenstein's, Dr. Frankenstein, and Trump is Frankenstein's monster. It was Kevin McCarthy, it was Mitch McConnell that aided and abetted Trump's attacks on democracy. It was McConnell who refused to have an impeachment vote or whip votes to impeach and convict Donald Trump because he assumed that Trump's political career was over after January 6th. They famously hated each other. McConnell was very fastidious about avoiding criticizing Trump in public, both in and out of office. He's gotten a little bit sassier over time. Not so much since Trump has retaken power, but his assumption was, oh, well, I don't have to whip votes and undermine my party or have some egg on my face because the political backlash from January 6th will be sufficient to neutralize Donald Trump. In other words, McConnell thought he could have his cake and eat it too and say, well, no, I'm Mr. Republican and Trump was a Republican, so no, I'm not going to vote to impeach him, but also I hate the guy, he sucks, and I'm happy that he'll never be president again because of the political fallout of January 6th. Except he miscalculated. And misunderstood what his party had become, what he helped allow his party to become. And he has ultimately become a victim, McConnell has, of Trump's seizure of the Republican Party. So anyway, on the tariff note, Burgess Everett notes some Republicans are rooting for the Supreme Court to block Trump's emergency tariff power. Let me find this here. Everett is with Semaphore. I forgot where he was from as a reporter. But Burgess Everett of Semaphore says some Republicans are rooting for the Supreme Court to block Trump's emergency tariff power. Of course, some of them are unnamed. GOP senator, quote, "We are the ones who dictate tax policy. This is a form of taxation." Susan Collins, quote, "The constitutional authority is pretty clear investing in Congress." Lisa Murkowski, quote, "The Canada retaliatory tariffs are not appropriate, and he had no basis for advancing those." Again, they're hoping that this conservative Supreme Court will do what Republican lawmakers, did not have the courage to do. I mean, again, good on them for pushing back in this instance on Brazil, but they should have been vociferously against this from the beginning, and they were not. So they're hoping the Supreme Court will succeed where they failed. Let's dive into some more, though, on this vote. Actually, I will say on the topic of the Supreme Court, I spoke with Professor Leah Littman, who co-hosts the Strict Scrutiny podcast, which is part of Crooked Media, which is a sister show to Pod Save America, and she's I think she's University of Michigan School of Law, if I remember correctly, big Swiftie. I've interviewed her multiple times, and she said, "Listen, during the most recent interview, she said the law on this is pretty clear. The Constitution on this is pretty clear that yes, if you're just looking at a good faith interpretation of the text and the spirit of the Constitution, then yes, it would be a unanimous striking these tariffs down." But Professor Littman is kind of like me. She's a bit of a cynic, and she believes actually it's a little more likely that the Republican appointees on the Supreme Court will actually uphold Trump's tariffs in order to avoid his wrath and in order to avoid the awkwardness of forcing him to pay back the tariff revenue. And I'm with her. So I'm not entirely confident that the Supreme Court will strike down Trump's unconstitutional, ridiculous tariffs. So I digress. Anyway, regarding this vote, the Senate once again rebuked Donald Trump on tariffs, a vote that comes as Trump is in Asia touting tariffs and notching progress on trade agreements. Senators on Tuesday voted 52-48 to terminate the national emergency Trump declared in order to impose 50% tariffs on most Brazilian goods in July. 5 Republicans joined the Democrats in the vote. The vote, the first in a series of 3 expected resolutions aiming to block Trump's tariffs on Brazil and Canada, as well as his widespread global tariffs, comes amid bubbling tension in the Senate over how Trump's trade war has affected farmers and small businesses. Next week, the U.S. Supreme Court is set to hear oral arguments over whether Trump has overstepped his authority by using an emergency law to impose tariffs on nearly every country in the world. Quote, "Emergencies are like war, famine, and tornadoes," said Rand Paul, the most vocal opponent of Trump's tariffs in the Senate. Quote, "Not liking someone's tariffs is not an emergency. It's an abuse of the emergency power, and it's Congress abdicating their traditional role in taxes." But the vote largely remains symbolic. Republican leaders in the House have blocked the chamber from voting to overrule the tariffs until March, protecting Republican members who are facing blowback from home state farmers and small businesses angry over the economic impact. Senator Ron Wyden, co-sponsor on the Canada and global tariff resolutions, said he's hearing rising discontent among, quote, Republican senators who go home and they just feel like they're getting hit by a trade wrecking ball. Quote, "People come up and say the tariffs are killing us. You go to the grocery store and everybody's up in arms," continued Wyden, a ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, which oversees trade issues. Trump announced that he would impose a 50% tariff in July in response to what he felt was an unfair legal case against former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, a Trump ally. Trump of the tropics is what he's called, by the way, because he also attempted to stage a coup, over his role in attempting to overturn the results of the country's 2022 election, as well as over Brazil's policies on digital content, which has ensnared U.S. social media companies. So, let's see here. That order received pushback from some in Congress, including Tim Kaine, who argued that By allowing Trump to declare an emergency over a country's nation over a country's treatment of a political ally would open the door to broader use of national emergencies to govern. Quote, don't lie and say there's an energy emergency when there isn't, said Kane, who sponsored the resolution. Well, don't lie and say Brazil's prosecution of a president is an emergency when it's not. Don't lie to increase the price of coffee by 40% in a year. Don't use the lie to punish a country with whom we have a trade surplus. Don't lie and hurt my citizens. And that's exactly what Trump did. So again, folks, we are seeing some sort of pushback from Senate Republicans on this, which is extremely rare in the second Trump administration. And even though it won't go anywhere because of the cultishness of House Republicans, it is still worth noting. And again, next week, there will be oral arguments by the Supreme Court, and that will certainly be interesting. And we'll probably try to get Professor Lippman back to help interpret the oral arguments. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.